Welcome to On Record PR, where we discuss the topics and insights that matter most to law firm leaders. In this week's episode, Leslie Richards, the Chief Innovation Officer at Furia Rubel Communications, joins Gina Rubel to discuss a topic that's reshaping digital strategy: zero-click searches and the rise of AI-generated summaries. If your law firm relies on organic traffic, or if you're investing in thought leadership and media placements, this conversation is a must listen as they unpack what it means when people no longer click but still get answers. They talk about Google's evolving algorithms, how credibility influences AI summaries, and why backlinks from reputable media matter more than ever. We hope you enjoy this timely episode.
I think the big picture is that click-throughs from search are drastically reduced as a result of zero-click searches. And zero-click searches, to define the term, is when you put a query into a search engine, let's use Google as an example, and it returns an AI summary, which gives you your answer without you having to click through to a website. So a year ago, 18 months ago, instead of getting that AI summary, you would have gotten a list of websites that contained the answer to your query, but you would have had to click through to them.
Right. So you would start with your sponsored and then you would have your organic. But now you have AI, then sponsored, then organic.
Correct. And we know that people clicked on the organic results just below the sponsored at much higher rates than they clicked on sponsored ads, even though they were at the top, sponsored listings, right? So the most valuable traffic we have is organic traffic that comes from organic clicks on non-sponsored ads in those search results pages. That converts at a much higher rate. In other words, you're much likelier to get somebody who's going to click through on something, who's going to fill out a form, who is actually a fit for your content and your services. So what happens now when we can't rank when we can't get click-throughs for those top results, right? The next best thing is that we get listed as a source for that AI summary. So that AI summary, it'll give you first kind of a general summary, and then often it'll say more details. And you can click and it will give you a much more detailed response. And then at the end of that, it will show you the sources, the websites that it used to generate that AI response. So the goal now for a lot of people who want online visibility has been, how do I get placed? How do I become a source for that AI summary?
Right? So some questions come to mind. Well, first is, are we aware of any specific criteria for getting sourced in an AI summary?
We never know for sure, right? Because Google's not going to tell us. But as the summaries become more and more prolific, and as we get a better sense, as we see who's being used, we get a better sense of what Google might be prioritizing. So at the moment, and that's the caveat because search is always changing, right? It's really a field for lifelong learners. So at the moment, we think that, if you think about SEO and kind of the 3 C's of SEO, which are content, code, and credibility, we think that credibility is really high and weighted pretty significantly for you to get shown in that source list for the AI summary. And so credibility is based on what Google calls EAT, or expertise, authoritativeness, and trustworthiness. So are you an authoritative source? Are you trustworthy? And do you have the expertise to be talking about this topic. And one of the ways that you can establish that is by keeping good company. So what do we mean by that? You're not hanging out with the crappy little websites that nobody knows about and people don't reference regularly. You're hanging out with the people who have really well-established reputations online. So, how does Google know you're hanging out with those other websites? You get a link from a website like Law 360 or Bloomberg back to your firm's website.
So those are the backlinks that we've talked about for
Those
many
are backlinks.
years.
Yes. Yes. And this is now becoming increasingly important, we think, for this particular objective, which is becoming a source for an AI summary. So, how do you get good backlinks? You have a great PR team. You have a team that understands the media, can place your content on those platforms, on those websites, and generate a link back to your website. So this is where PR and SEO have always had a marriage. And now, because credibility is becoming so much more important, and think about it, it's also becoming important because we're kind of in this anti-trust, eroded trust landscape now in the media, right? So these big established brands are more trustworthy from Google's standpoint. And so more than ever, they matter, which means more than ever, having your content distributed on these platforms matters.
So I have a couple of questions. Another one is, when you talk about credibility, it's my understanding that there's something called authority score, or the
domain authority.
Domain authority score.
Yes.
And
yes.
that domain authority score is how is that generally, in layperson's terms, how is that determined and what does it mean and why does it matter to this conversation?
So an authority score is basically a score out of 100 that is assigned to a website based on many criteria. It was developed by Moz, which is a search engine service, basically. And we believe that it is considered when a site is placed on a search, the ranking of a site on a search results page, right? So the authority score for something like Law 360 is 56 as of today. I mean, these are scores that move around a little bit. Bloomberg, for example, 87. Okay. The Hill, 78. Perkins Coie, 46. Paul Weiss, 45.
So they have really strong authority scores. So the likelihood is that when we go, and right now we're just talking about Google search. I want to expand that in a moment, but if you go to Google search, they're going to look at the domains with higher authority scores, which feeds into that idea of credibility.
Yes, exactly.
And that's why I wanted to talk a little bit about that, because we at Furia Rubel have talked about the importance of organic content, credible content, timely content, relevant content for nearly 25 years.
Yep.
And, that was before we even knew what an authority score was. And so it really goes to show that, and we've seen this with some of our clients, where those firms that haven't focused on search engine marketing as the pay to play, as opposed to strategic, organic, thoughtful content, where they're actually coming up in some very key Gen AI searches, which are leading to new business referrals. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about this because we've been talking about Google search, but now people are actually using Gen AI tools like ChatGPT
yes.
to do search as well.
So ChatGPT, and it started with Perplexity. Perplexity was the best at listing their sources with every answer, but ChatGPT does it as well now. And so coming up, it's the same thing. Coming up in those, and we actually did a whole presentation, Gina, for our clients.
Right.
But we did a whole thing on what are the criteria, and they're very similar.
And that's why I think it's so important for people to understand, for our clients and for the legal audience to understand, because, for example, one of our clients reached out to us, and they're a mid-size firm, and said, by the way, we just got a new business lead as a result of a ChatGPT query. And the managing partner was shocked.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, oh, no, I'm not shocked at all. This is what's happening. This is the change. And this is also important for marketing officers who need to justify their investment in both internal comms strategy and strategists, as well as external comms partners like ours or others. So
yes.
And that's where, this conversation keeps coming up. So what are, besides having great content, smart content, timely content, relevant content that creates credibility, what are other things that law firms in particular need to be thinking about so that they are coming up in these search tools like Google search, which is now Gen AI?
I mean, the credibility one is what we think is the biggest, right? And then if we talked about those 3 C's again, it's content, code, and credibility, right? Content, we've sort of already talked about. Thought leadership. And I think we have a colleague who just wrote a very good article on the fact that thought leadership cannot be repeating what other people have already said. It's just, that's not leading. That's following. So thought leadership needs to be bold. It needs to have a unique perspective. You need to have the expertise to be writing on that topic. So your bio needs to relate to the topic that you are writing on, for example.
So I just think I need to disagree on something, and I want to talk this through a second.
Sure.
When you say they can't be writing about what others have written about, we've always told them just the opposite. So, for example, if a lawyer is a civil rights attorney and they're writing about the Department of Education, and that's the kind of work they do, just because somebody else has written about it doesn't mean they shouldn't.
No.
It just needs to be an original thought.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yes. Yes. Which sometimes requires going out on a limb, right? You need to have an opinion. You need to be adding something to the conversation that hasn't already been considered.
Absolutely. However, if you do a lot of blogging at your law firm, let's say, and your law firm's domain has an authority score of 46, and somebody else wrote a blog on something similar and their authority score is a 2, you're likely, even if you've written later, you're more likely going to have your content picked up. It doesn't mean, because sometimes there's not a new angle, but it's still within your firm's expertise to be talking about those subjects. So I guess I'm thinking about your evergreen content versus your timely content.
So there's a couple things to tease apart. One, not all content is written for SEO. You may have a need to demonstrate your thought leadership for branding purposes, for client acquisition, for other audiences than search engines. And so that might be the reason that you're publishing thought leadership that may be already kind of ground that's been covered in the industry.
So that's the validation point for when somebody's going to your law firm website to validate that you do that kind of work.
Yes, exactly.
Got it.
And that you have experience doing that work and you understand the landscape, etc. In terms of who's going to get ranked for a piece of content, Authority score is absolutely part of it, but there are so many components. How long your domain has been up, backlinks, certainly. Whether or not you have several articles on the same topic and you can present kind of a body of knowledge around a topic, and that body of knowledge represents or demonstrates your ability to take each of those subtopics and flesh it out and show expertise there. There's so many. And then we haven't talked about code, and I don't know that we really need to get into that, but there's a whole list of things that Google looks at to see how well your site is coded, how fast your pages load, how clean and clear your navigation is, whether or not you have circuitous links all over the place that make it hard for Google to scroll your site in the few minutes that it allocates to each domain. Is it getting to the right pages? Is it scrolling the correct pages based on the content that you want it to see? Have you set up schematic data? Have you given it information that it needs to help it find its way through your site appropriately?
Well, and that's just another argument for why law firms, which is our target audience, need to understand the importance of their website, because some don't want to update them. They're 30 years old, literally 30 years old, and they think, oh, why am I not getting any new business from my website?
Right.
And so that's really interesting. So,
I mean, Google will look at something like, if you have a really old version of PHP, which is a language that many websites are written in.
I remember
And-
PHP.
And it's still around. It's just, if you've got an old version of it, I mean, most websites today are still written in PHP, but if you haven't updated in a long time, the kind of the core vitals of your website, Google's going to look at that and say, okay, they're running this old version.
So are we seeing in website analytics direct traffic to websites from
Yes.
the NAI?
Yes. Yeah. If you look at your referrals for your traffic, you'll see things like ChatGPT listed in those referring URLs.
Which further solidifies the importance of the type of content that we're talking about, that those PR, both the thought leadership as well as the sourced pieces where people are being quoted in high value media outlets. And when I say high value, it doesn't have to be CNN or the New York Times. They're great, but they might not be relevant to the type of work. So it's relevancy, credibility, all of those things.
All of those things together. Yep.
Thank you for joining us today. If you found today's episode helpful, please subscribe, share it with a colleague, and consider leaving a review on iTunes. Please continue to share your feedback and ideas with us at podcast@onrecordpr.com. We'll see you next week.
This episode is brought to you by Furia Rubel Communications, a public relations and marketing agency serving law firms and businesses worldwide. With an expert team positioned throughout the U.S. and supported by an international faculty, Furia Rubel enhances our clients' brands through integrated communications by providing expert guidance in crisis management and high-profile litigation, protecting brand and reputation, and supporting internal marketing teams. To learn more, visit furiarubel.com. On Record PR is produced by Jennifer Simpson-Carr and Matt Henderson, with support from the team at Furia Rubel Communications. This episode is edited by Isabel Horan and Christian Yamula. Visit www.onrecordpr.com for resources and more information.